The message that changed everything, it was just after midnight in Los Angeles, and the world outside was silent. The city's noise had faded into a soft hum, the way it often does when the world forgets itself for a moment. Sundar Pichai sat in his quiet home library, the kind of place where thoughts floated freely, untouched by the weight of time. Books lined the walls, some worn and faded, others pristine, but Sundar wasn't looking at them. His eyes were on his laptop screen, where rows of data flickered across spreadsheets and dashboards. He was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily to him anymore. Not because of stress or pressure. He had long learned to manage those. It was the deep kind of restlessness that came from success, when you have everything, but still feel something missing. And tonight, as he rubbed his eyes and reached for his cup of now cold tea, a soft chime echoed from his phone down a new message. He glanced at it lazily, expecting another late-night email from a team halfway across the world. Instead, he saw a name. That made his heart pause. K-A-R-T-I-K. His younger brother. They hadn't spoken much in recent months. Life had gotten in the way. Meetings, flights, press, deadlines. Karthik wasn't one to reach out unless it mattered. Sundar opened the message slowly, sensing something deeper. Anna, I didn't want to trouble you. I really didn't, but I'm falling behind on rent. I've been trying everything. 2 jobs, side hustles. I just need a little help. Only for a month or 2. I'll figure it out. Please don't feel obligated. Sundar stared at the words, each one landing heavy in his chest. Anna, big brother. A word he hadn't heard from Karthik in so long. It wasn't the request that shook him. It was the tone behind it. Pride, pain, and the quiet desperation of someone who had tried to carry the weight alone for too long. He remembered Karthik's smile when they were boys, growing up in their modest home in Chennai. The long train rides to school, their mother packing 2 tiffin boxes, one for each. Their father reading the newspaper aloud at breakfast, always insisting on discussing world affairs before school. They were never rich, but they had each other. And even then, Sundar remembered how fiercely Karthik had looked up to him. How he tried to walk like him, speak like him, even mimic his handwriting. Sundar had always felt protective of him. But somewhere between Silicon Valley boardrooms and keynote speeches, that closeness had dimmed into polite distance. And now his brother was struggling, truly struggling, while he sat surrounded by wealth and comfort. He set the phone down, his heart thudding against the silence. Something about the message kept repeating in his mind. Please don't feel obligated. That line hurt more than anything, not because Karthik meant to guilt him, but because it revealed how little he now expected from his big brother, Sundar. Didn't reply right away. He stared into the quiet for what felt like hours. And then he stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the stars. In that moment, he wasn't the CEO of one of the world's most powerful tech companies. He wasn't the face of innovation. He was just a brother who had missed the signs, who hadn't picked up the phone, who hadn't asked how his family was doing in months. Sundar took a deep breath, walked back to his desk, and opened a private notebook, a leather-bound journal he rarely touched. He flipped to a blank page and wrote 4 words, "Fix this," without noise, because it wasn't about charity, or power, or image. It was about making things right. Not just financially, but emotionally. And he knew this wasn't going to be as simple as sending money. No. He had to understand why Karthik didn't feel safe enough to reach out sooner. He had to understand what else he'd missed. He picked up the phone, ready to call Karthik. But then he paused. He thought about how proud his brother was. How this call, if done wrong, could make Karthik feel small. Pitied. Helpless. So he did something else. He called his assistant and scheduled a last-minute trip. No announcement. No press. No entourage. He was going back to Chennai, and he wasn't telling anyone why. As he closed his suitcase quietly. The house still asleep around him, Sundar's eyes landed on a photo frame near the door. It was a picture from over 20 years ago. 2 skinny boys sitting on a terrace, eating mango slices straight off the peel. smiling as if the whole world was theirs. And in that moment, Sundar knew this journey wasn't just about helping his brother Dot, it was about finding the pieces of himself he'd left behind. But as he reached the airport and boarded the red-eye flight, he didn't know yet that the moment he touched down, everything would spiral far beyond anything he imagined. Because Karthik had a secret, and it was something that would force Sundar to face not just his past, but the very truth of who he had become. Asterisk the apartment behind the silence. Plane landed under a gray morning sky. Monsoon clouds hovered low over Chennai, painting the city in shades of memory. Sundar stepped off the flight alone, a simple backpack slung over his shoulder, wearing a plain shirt and jeans. No one at the airport recognized him, or if they did, they were too polite or sleepy to react, and Sundar liked it that way. Anonymity gave him clarity. It stripped away the noise of titles and expectations. His car was waiting, but not the usual executive ride. He had asked for a small, inconspicuous vehicle, something that wouldn't raise questions. As the driver navigated the familiar streets, Sundar watched the city blur past through the rain-dotted window. Chennai had changed dot-class towers. Stood where corner shops once sold roasted peanuts, tech parks had replaced playgrounds. And yet, some things hadn't changed at all. The scent of jasmine in the air, the call of cycle vendors, the quiet resilience in people's eyes, but none of that eased the tightness in his chest. He was going to see Karthik, not as a global figure, not with a camera crew, just as Anna, the big brother who had disappeared behind Success Dot when they reached the neighborhood. Sundar asked the driver to wait a few streets away. He wanted to walk the rest of the way. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the road ahead was quiet. He passed a corner tea stall, the same one he and Karthik had gone to as teenagers, laughing over 10-rupee biscuits and oversweet chai. Finally, he reached the apartment building, thought it was older than he imagined. Paint peeling in corners, a flickering light at the entrance, and narrow stairs that creaked under his steps. He climbed to the third floor, his heart pounding louder with each step. Outside the door was a faded doormat that said, "Home Sweet Home," in crooked letters. Sundar hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorbell. What was he going to say? Hey, I got your message. Decided to fly across the world and show up unannounced. That could go very wrong. But before he could decide, the door opened, and there stood Karthik. He looked thinner, not just physically, but in spirit. His eyes carried the weight of silent battles, the kind you don't speak of. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he wore an old college hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen the inside of a washing machine in weeks. He blinked, stunned. Double quotes, Anna. Sundar tried to smile. For a long second, they just looked at each other. Two brothers, now worlds apart, yet bound by memories that time hadn't erased. Kirt stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was small. A single bedroom, modest furniture, stacks of books on a shelf, and a tiny kitchen that smelled faintly of masala and coffee. Sundar looked around, his throat tightening. This wasn't just a struggling man's apartment. It was the home of someone holding on, with everything he had. I didn't expect you to come, Karthik said, softly, pouring water into a cup and offering it to Sundar. I know, Sundar replied, but I had to. They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Both were searching for the right words in the silence. Finally, Karthik spoke. I didn't mean to put pressure on you. I didn't know who else to ask, and I hate asking for help. You shouldn't have to hate it, Sundar said gently, especially not from me. Karthik shrugged. You've got your world. I've got mine. But it used to be the same world, Sundar whispered. Kartik looked at him, the walls he'd built slowly starting to crack. I didn't want to be the brother of Sundar Pichai. I wanted to be Karthik Pichai, who made it on his own. Those words hit harder than Sundar expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. And you will, Sundar replied, but you don't have to suffer in silence to prove that. The emotion in Karthik's eyes flickered. pride wrestling with vulnerability. Sundar stood and walked to the window. Looking out at the city below, got double quotes, K-A-R-T-A-K. Do you remember that time I failed my physics test in 10th grade? And I locked myself in the room thinking I'd never make it to 8. Karthik smiled faintly. Amma made me slide chocolates under the door. You sat outside that door for 5 hours. Didn't say a word? Just sat there. Because I knew you needed someone to be there. Sundar turned, his eyes glassy. And now it's my turn. The brothers stood in the same room, but for the first time in years, they were no longer distant. Yet, as the morning passed and laughter returned, in small doses, Sundar noticed something odd. The apartment was clean, yes. But too clean, minimal, empty in strange ways. Like it had been cleared out recently. He casually walked over to the bookshelf and ran his fingers across the spines. Most of them were borrowed library books. A few had torn covers. And then, in the corner, he saw a pawn receipt tucked under a coaster. His heart skipped. He picked it up slowly, pretending it was nothing. A gold chain, a wristwatch. Even his old cricket trophy from their childhood got items pawned last week. He turned to Karthik, who was busy making tea in the kitchen, humming an old song. He was hiding more than just rent problems. Sundar's mind began to race. Why would Karthik pawn something so sentimental? Something he'd kept for over 2 decades. And why hadn't he told him the full truth? Before he could ask, a loud knock came at the door. They both turned. Another knock. Harder this time. K-A-R-T-A-I-K, single quotes, S expression changed. It wasn't surprise. It was fear. Don't answer that, he whispered. Who is it? Sundar asked. K-R-T-A-K. Didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the door quietly, placing his ear against it. Mr. Karthik Pichai, a voice called from outside, firm and cold. You're behind on payment. This is your final warning. Sundar stepped forward. Who is that? Karthik shook his head, his voice trembling. Someone I should have never borrowed from. Sundar felt a chill spread through his body. He had come here to help pay rent, but it looked like his brother was tangled in something much deeper and much more dangerous. The knocks continued, louder now. K-A-R-T-A. backed away from the door. And in that moment, Sundar realized this wasn't just about money. This was about something darker. Something his brother had kept hidden, and if he didn't act fast, something terrible could happen. Asterisk the depth beneath the surface heath. Knocking stopped. But the silence it left behind was worse. It pressed against the walls. Thick and threatening, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. Sundar turned toward Karthik, who stood still by the door, his face pale, his hands clenched into quiet fists. Karthik, Sundar said gently, talk to me. What was that about? Karthik looked down, lips pressed together, jaw tight like he was holding in something that had been festering for months. He shook his head slightly, not in defiance, but in defeat. I didn't want you to know, he said softly, walking back toward the kitchen counter and resting his palms against it. You came here because of a rent message. But that wasn't the real problem. Sundar walked over, his voice calm but firm. Then what is the real problem? There was a long pause before Karthik spoke again. It started about 6 months ago. The startup I was working for, it collapsed. Funding dried up overnight. They laid off everyone with barely a week's notice. No severance, no backup plan. I had just moved into this place, paid my deposit, thought I was finally on my feet. He paused, swallowed hard, then continued. I didn't want to ask you for help. I wanted to fix it myself, so I started freelancing. Web design, consulting, tutoring, anything. I even picked up part-time delivery work late at night. Sundar listened, the pit in his stomach growing. But even all that wasn't enough. I was behind on bills, then one day at a cafe I met someone. He said he helped people in tough spots. Quick loans, no questions asked. I didn't think too hard. I was desperate. I took the money. How much? Sundar asked. It started with 50,000 rupees, just to cover rent, and then another 20, Then it ballooned. Interest kept stacking. They'd show up outside my place, follow me after work, call me at midnight. I tried to pay it off bit by bit, but it wasn't enough. I sold things, pawned what I could. I've been playing catch up ever since. His voice cracked as he added, I thought if I could just hold on a little longer, I'd land a new job and fix everything. But nothing's worked. And now they've started threatening to come inside. Sundar stood still, every word crashing into him like waves. How had he not known? How had this gone so far? He looked at his brother, a grown man, intelligent, resourceful, proud, reduced to living in fear, hiding from men who treated desperation like a business. How many people are involved? Sundar asked carefully. Just one man mainly, Rajiv. He owns a small finance company. Unofficial, shady. He has a few guys with him. They're not exactly criminals, but they're close. They know how to intimidate people. Sundar took a deep breath and turned away, walking toward the window. The rain had started again, soft and steady, like a quiet warning. He had dealt with crises before, global ones, technological ones, corporate ones. But this was personal, and far more fragile. His first instinct was to wire money, settle the debt, erase the threat. But as he thought about it, he realized something deeper. If he simply paid it off, Karthik would feel small again, like he had failed, and Rajiv would move on to the next desperate soul, untouched, unchallenged. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about principle. And Sundar knew he had to fix this the right way. Karthik, he said, turning back. You trusted me enough to send that message. Now, trust me to handle this. But on one condition, no more secrets. Karthik looked up, eyes wet but steady. No more secrets. Sundar nodded. Good. Now, where does this Rajiv operate? He's got a back office above a pawn shop in Nungambakam. Not far, but Anna, please don't confront him. He's not someone you can reason with. Sundar gave a small smile, one that held a quiet fire. I'm not going to confront him. Then what are you going to do? I am going to understand him. And then I'm going to make him wish he never mistreated you. Later that evening, Sundar slipped out of the apartment with a simple plan and a not-so-simple determination. He dressed down, blending in with the crowd, and made his way to Nungambakam. The area was busy, bustling with people and traffic. Thin building stood between a pharmacy and a meat shop. Above the pawn store was a narrow staircase, unmarked, dimly lit. Sundar climbed it quietly. He didn't go in. Instead, he watched Dot for nearly an hour. He stood near a tea stall across the road, sipping from a paper cup, pretending to scroll on his phone. He saw men go in and out of that door, some nervous, some angry, some pale as ghosts. A few came out red-eyed, clutching crumpled papers or envelopes. Others looked hollow. The business was cruel, feeding off fear. When Sundar was sure he'd seen enough, he returned to the apartment. Karta was waiting, worry written all over his face. Did you go there? I watched, not spoke. Tomorrow, I'll do more. What are you planning? You'll see. That night, Sundar barely slept. He sat at the small desk in Karthik's room, lit only by a soft lamp, and pulled out his laptop. He wasn't using Google's resources. Not tonight. This was personal. He dug into local records, business listings, complaints, news reports, blogs, forums. Bit by bit, the full picture of Ray's operations came to light. Unlicensed lending, dozens of unresolved complaints, hidden partnerships with corrupt local officials. There were gaps in the system. No proper legal filings, no audits, no transparency. Sundar began writing everything down, building a quiet, meticulous case. But he didn't stop there. He drafted an anonymous report and sent it to 3 trusted journalists. Local ones? The kind that still fought for stories that mattered. He made one more phone call to a childhood friend named Shiva, who now worked in Chennai's legal aid network. I need your help, Sundar said. With what? Exposing a man who's making money off desperation. You sound serious. I am. The next morning, Sundar and Karthik sat quietly at the breakfast table. The news was playing in the background on a small TV with a flickering screen. Breaking news. Local money lender under investigation for illegal practices. Victims speak out. Karthik turned toward the screen, stunned. That's him, he whispered. Yeah, Sundar said quietly, sipping his tea. That's him. How? Just watched, listened, connected dots, and nudged the right people. Karthik looked at his brother, realization dawning slowly. You didn't just help me. You helped everyone like me. Sundar shrugged. It's not over yet. This is just the beginning. And then his phone buzzed. It was a message, but not from Rajiv. It was from their mother. One simple line. Come on. We need to talk. It's about Karthik. Sundar's hands trembled slightly. He looked at Karthik. Did you tell Amma anything? Karthik shook his head. Nothing. Why? Sundar stared at the message. Because if their mother was saying this, there was another secret waiting. And it could change everything. Asterisk. The truth at mother's door it was still raining when Sundar and Karthik reached their childhood home. The road to their old neighborhood felt narrower than before, as if the world had expanded around it while the street stood frozen in time. The buildings hadn't changed much. Chipped paint, crooked gates, power lines tangled like jungle vines. The same flower vendor sat near the corner, her stall blooming in colors that defied the gray sky. Kids played cricket barefoot in the rain, dodging potholes and laughing without care. The air here was different, heavy with memory. Sundar hadn't returned in years. He'd sent money, gifts, and messages, but never his time. Something about walking away from home to build an empire made it hard to walk back again. Like success created invisible walls between then and now. Asterisk. But now he stood before the rusted brown gate, his brother beside him, both silent. Their mother, Amala, opened the door before they even knocked. She was older now, thinner. Silver streaks ran through her hair, and her back curved more than he remembered. But her eyes, sharp, searching, and endlessly kind, were exactly the same. You both came. She said softly. Sundar stepped forward, hugged her tightly, burying his face into her shoulder like he had when he was 10 and had fallen off. His bicycle. She didn't say a word. She just held him. Come inside, both of you, she said, stepping aside. Asterisk. The house smelled like turmeric and jasmine. The wooden floor creaked just the same. Framed photos of the two brothers lined the wall near the staircase. One of Sundar in his graduation robes, one of Karthik playing the tabla at a school function. Their father's portrait hung above them, watching. They sat down in the living room. The ceiling fan above humming a lazy rhythm. Karthik looked nervous, fidgeting with the frayed hem of his shirt. Amala brought in 2 cups of filter coffee, placed them down, and sat across from them. I saw the news, she said to Sundar, about the money lender, about what you did. Sundar nodded slowly. I had to, he replied. He was hurting people, including Karthik. Amala's eyes shifted to her younger son. He didn't tell me. I had to find out from their neighbors that men were coming to the building, that there were threats. Karthik looked away, ashamed. I didn't want you to worry. He mumbled, but I'm your mother, she said, her voice breaking. Worrying is part of the job. They sat in silence for a long moment, and then she turned to Sundar. There's something you need to know, something I should have told you years ago. But I thought maybe it wasn't the right time. Maybe you were too far away, or maybe I was just afraid. Sundar leaned forward, his heart suddenly heavy. What is it, Amma? She looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. After your father passed, things got harder than I let on. I told you everything was fine. I didn't want to burden you. You had just started your new role in the U.S. I wanted you to fly, not be pulled down by home troubles. Sundar's mind flashed back. The late night calls, her calm voice, her reassurances. He never questioned them. He believed her when she said she was okay. But we weren't okay, she continued. The savings dried up fast. The pension was delayed. I took a teaching job at the local school, but it barely paid anything. And Karthik, he gave up his scholarship. Sundar froze. What? He was supposed to study engineering in Coimbatore, she said. He got in. Full scholarship. He never told you because he knew we couldn't afford even the travel and hostel costs. And he didn't want to ask you. He saw how hard you were working, so he gave it up quietly. Stayed back. Took whatever jobs he could find to help me. To keep this house from falling apart. Sundar turned to his brother. Stunned. Kartik still wouldn't look at him. Why didn't you tell me? Sundar asked, his voice thick with emotion. Because I didn't want to be a shadow, Karthik said finally. I didn't want people to say I only got somewhere because of you. I wanted to build something that was mine. I didn't want your help. I wanted your pride. Sundar felt something break inside him. He had spent so many years running ahead, believing that he was lifting his family by succeeding. That each promotion, each award, each speech was for all of them. But in reality, he had flown so far he hadn't noticed his brother quietly anchoring their home. I didn't know, Sundar whispered. I thought you were fine. I pretended to be, Karthik replied. Because it was easier than asking for help. Amala reached out and placed her hands on both of theirs. You are both good men. But pride without communication can turn into silence. And silence is what nearly broke this family. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like a song only the city knew. Sundar stood, walked to the shelf, and picked up an old photo of him and Karthik on a beach, their arms around each other, laughing at something only brothers understand. We're fixing this, he said. Not just the money. Not just the threats. Everything. The silence, the distance. It ends now. Karthik stood beside him, and for the first time in years, he felt taller. Not in height, but in spirit. He felt seen. What are you thinking? Karthik asked. Sundar smiled. I'm thinking you're not meant to be delivering groceries at midnight. Karthik raised an eyebrow. So, what, you're going to get me a job at Google? Sundar shook his head. No. I'm going to help you build your own company. One that makes a difference. One that's yours. But I've got nothing left. Karthik replied, voice unsure. You've got grit, resilience, creativity, and a lifetime of lessons most people never learn. That's more than enough. Amala smiled, tears in her eyes. Your father would be proud, she said. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, scribbling ideas on old notepads, dreaming like they did when they were kids, building towers out of Legos and pretending they were architects of the future. It wasn't about the money or the company. It was about restoring something that had been lost in the pursuit of greatness. Their bond, their roots, their shared purpose. As night fell, Karthik received a phone call. He looked at the screen. Rajiv. He answered. Hello? Pause. Then, you think this is over? The media piece was cute, but I'm still coming for what you owe. Sundar took the phone from him calmly. Hi, Rajiv, he said. This is Sundar. Silence on the other end. You've made a mistake. Sundar continued. Not just legally, but morally. And I'm going to make sure the world sees exactly who you are. Click. The line went dead. They looked at each other. This wasn't over, but they were no longer afraid. Because now they were facing it together. Asterisk. Storm named Rajiv. The next morning came with no sunlight, only thick clouds that draped over Chennai like a warning. The storm from the night before hadn't passed. It had simply paused. The sky, dark and brooding, felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the old Pichai home, Sundar sat at the wooden table in the living room with a hot cup of filter coffee, barely touched. His raced through the night's events, the confrontation on the phone, Karthik's quiet strength, their mother's truth, and the weight of it all pressing down on his chest. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about reclaiming something that had been stripped from his family, not just security, but dignity. Kartik came down the stairs, hair still damp from a cold shower, his face showing the kind of weariness that came from years of holding things in. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a seat across from Sundar. "About what?" "About the business idea. I want to do it, not because of Rajiv. Not even because of you. I want to do it for me. I've spent too long trying to survive. I want to build something now. Something that matters." Sundar looked up, the tension in his jaw easing just slightly. "You've got a story, Karthik, and people relate to real stories. We can use that not as a weapon, but as a bridge." "I don't want to use sympathy," Karthik said. "I want to use truth," Sundar smiled. "Truth works better than sympathy. It inspires action." They spent the next few hours sketching ideas, not on a whiteboard or a high-tech interface, just on old notepads with blue ink pens, pages curling. At the corners, they talked about a platform that could help people like Karthik, individuals who needed short-term financial help without falling into the traps of predatory lenders. A digital lending platform, Karthik said, eyes lighting up. But ethical, transparent, interest rates capped. Repayment counseling, even financial education, Sundar nodded slowly. People don't just need money. They need guidance, options, empathy. But just as the energy in the room was beginning to rise, there was a loud knock at the front door, a familiar sound now and not a welcome one. Sundar stood up slowly, Kartik followed. But his hands were clenched again. Amala emerged from the kitchen, her face already pale. Who could that be? They didn't have to guess. When Sundar opened the door, there he was, Rajiv. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with the air of a man used to control. Two men stood behind him, broad, silent, dressed in black. Their presence wasn't casual. It was staged, so this is where the Golden Brother hides, Rajiv said, smirking as his eyes scanned Sundar. I must say, you look shorter than on TV. Sundar didn't flinch. And you look smaller than your threats. Rajiv chuckled, stepping forward. Listen, superstar. You may have scared a few journalists into sniffing around, but I've been doing this a long time. Nothing ever sticks. Not yet, Sundar replied, his tone steady. But it will. Do you think exposing me in the media ends this? This isn't Silicon Valley. This is the real world. I have people. I have protection. Karthik stepped beside his brother. We're not afraid of you anymore. Rajiv turned to him, eyes narrowing. You should be. Then Sundar did something unexpected. He stepped aside and motioned inside. Come in. He said. Rajiv blinked. What? You want to talk like men? Come in. Sit down. No threats. No fists. Just words. Rajiv hesitated, thrown off. Then, with a smirk, he walked in, flanked by his two men. They entered the small living room, looking out of place in its warmth and history. Tea? Sundar offered. Calmly got double quotes, no thanks, Rajiv said, sitting back in one of the old wooden chairs. Good, Sundar replied, because this won't take long. He pulled out a thin folder from the desk drawer. Inside were several pages, printed screenshots, document copies, and a list of victims. These, Sundar said, placing them on the table, are names of people you've exploited, loans given without contracts, repayments extracted with, threats, items seized illegally. And here's a list of regulatory violations your so-called company has committed. All compiled, all verified, all sent to the National Consumer Rights Board. Also shared with an NGO that helps prosecute financial abuse cases. Rajiv's smirk faded slightly. Sundar leaned forward. You've been hiding behind fear for too long. But people aren't afraid anymore? Not when they know someone's standing with them. Rajiv glanced at his men. Sundar smiled. Oh, and one more thing. See that car outside? Rajiv turned his head slightly, spotting a black car parked across the street. Inside is a lawyer, one of Chennai's best. She's already filed a legal notice against your company for unlawful lending practices under the Tamil Nadu Moneylenders Act. You can't prove anything, Rajiv snapped. Maybe not a loan, Sundar said. But when 20 people come forward with their stories, when journalists have copies of your calls and texts, when legal action starts moving through official channels, you'll be too busy defending yourself to bother anyone else. The room went quiet. The two men behind Rajiv shifted uncomfortably. And for the first time, Rajiv looked unsure. You came after my brother, Sundar said, his voice low. That was your mistake. Now you'll have to answer for all of them. Rajiv stood up, eyes darting. This isn't over. You're right, Sundar replied. It's just beginning. But not for us, for you. Rajiv stormed out, his men trailing behind as the door closed. The house exhaled. Sundar turned to Karthik. You okay? Karthik nodded. More than okay, Anna. I never imagined you'd go this far. I didn't go far, Sundar said. I just came home. Later that evening, Karthik sat on the rooftop, watching the city lights flicker on. Sundar joined him, handing him a folder. What's this? Seed capital, Sundar said. To start the company. Officially, legally, with a team. Karthik opened it slowly. Inside wasn't just money. It was a roadmap, contacts, even a small office space in Nungamakam. You did all this in a day? I've had some practice, Sundar said, smiling. But Karthik didn't smile right away. He looked up at his brother with something deeper, a quiet awe. Thank you, he said. Not just for the money, for believing I'm worth this. Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder. You always were. They sat there as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. But just before they could return downstairs, Sundar's phone buzzed again. An alert. His name was trending worldwide. Tech CEO takes on loan sharks to save brother and starts financial revolution. The world had noticed and suddenly everything they'd done quietly wasn't quiet anymore. Asterisk louder than silence when the story broke. It moved like fire through dry grass. Within hours of Sundar's name appearing in the headlines, the internet responded in waves. First with curiosity, then with shock, and finally with overwhelming support. News outlets across India and abroad picked it up. Not because of the corporate angle, not even because it involved a tech giant, but because of what it represented. A brother showing up, a system being challenged, a quiet act of courage, shaking something loud. By morning, Sundar's inbox was overflowing. Messages from journalists, letters from NGOs, outreach from policy reformers. But the ones that mattered most, the ones he read slowly, one by one, were the stories from everyday people. Women who had pawned their wedding jewelry to feed their children. Students who had fallen into debt traps trying to pay college fees. Small shopkeepers who had signed papers they didn't understand. They weren't asking for money. They were saying, thank you for making us feel seen. Sundar didn't answer any press calls. Instead, he sat quietly at the kitchen table with Karthik, both of them in their pajamas, sipping morning coffee. Amala moved around the house like a silent force of nature, cleaning, humming, folding clothes, grounding them both like she always had. Kartik had barely slept. He kept checking the notifications on his phone, stunned each time someone new shared their own story or offered support. I didn't expect this, he said. That's the thing about truth, Sundar replied. Once it's out, it echoes. They spent the next 2 days preparing quietly, not for media attention, but for something real. The official launch of Karthik's new platform, which they named Asha. Hope. It was simple. A digital tool to connect ethical micro-lenders with people in need, clear terms, educational resources, support groups, and perhaps most importantly, a community. A place where people didn't have to feel shamed for needing help. Sundar didn't appear in the promotional videos. He sat in front of a camera, wearing a plain shirt, and told the truth. His story got his failures, his hope. He didn't cry. He didn't dramatize. He just spoke like someone who had lived it. And that's what moved people. When the video went live, it was shared over 1 million times in the first 24 hours. Influencers talked about it. Activists supported it. And in corners of India and beyond, people started logging on to learn, to connect, to heal Dot, but not everyone was celebrating Dot on the third day. A small group of critics began pushing back online, accusing Sundar of using the story for clout, claiming the brothers had staged everything. Some even accused Karthik of being an actor. Does it bother you? Sundar asked him. A little, Karthik admitted, but not enough to stop. Sundar smiled. Good. Because when you disrupt something real, the noise always gets louder. That evening, they received an invitation. The Indian Consumer Rights Forum wanted Karthik to speak at a public event, a panel on financial transparency reform. Sundar offered to go with him, but Karthik shook his head. No, he said. I need to do this one alone. The event was held in a small auditorium in the heart of the city. No flashing lights. No red carpet. Just folding chairs, a few microphones, and a modest crowd. But among that crowd were men and women who had once been silent. And now they were listening. When Karthik walked onto the stage, his hands trembled slightly. But when he looked into the audience and saw his mother sitting in the second row, holding her sari tightly with pride in her eyes, and saw Sundar in the back, standing quietly with arms crossed and a soft smile on his face, the trembling stopped. He told the truth again, this time, to strangers. I'm not a hero, he said. I made mistakes. I let my pride stop me from asking for help. I borrowed from the wrong people, and I hid it. Not just from my brother, but from myself. He paused, voice steady now, but I learned something. Needing help doesn't make you weak. Hiding from it does. And the people who prey on that silence, they only win when we don't speak. A woman in the audience began to cry. An older man near the aisle began to clap. And soon, the room filled with applause. Not thunderous. Not showy, but deeply human. After the event, dozens came forward. Not for selfies, not for signatures, but for hugs. For handshakes? For connection. The next day, Karthik received a call from the state's finance minister's office. They wanted to meet. Not to endorse him, but to learn from him. You may have just started something bigger than you realize, Sundar told him that night. IK looked at his brother, still trying to believe that this was real. I thought success would feel like power, he said. But it feels more like peace. Sundar nodded slowly. Then you're doing it right. That night, back at their old home, the two brothers sat once again on the rooftop, the same place they used to lie down on summer nights as boys, counting stars and talking about the future. Only this time, the future wasn't something far away. It was right here. It was now. Remember when you used to talk about building rockets? Karthik said. Sundar laughed. You used to draw comic strips about them. Yeah, Karthik replied. And you'd always correct the science. They both laughed, not the polite kind of laughter, but the deep kind, the healing kind. And then Sundar grew quiet. I used to think that the further I went in life, the more successful I became, he said. But maybe real success is being able to come back and still matter. Karthik didn't say anything. He just reached over and rested a hand on his brother's shoulder. And in that moment, no cameras, no noise, no headlines, just two boys who had grown up, fallen apart, and found each other again. In the days that followed, Asha continued to grow. Volunteers joined. Local banks took notice. Partnerships formed. A small office opened in Chennai, then another in Pune. And slowly, a network of hope began to build. But Sundar didn't return to the US right away. He stayed in Chennai for another month, quietly, without fanfare. He walked the streets he grew up on. He ate street food with Karthik and laughed like he hadn't in years. He even gave a surprise guest lecture at Karthik's old community college, not as a CEO, but as a brother. And when he finally boarded a plane back, Karthik came with him. Not to visit, but to speak at Stanford. The invitation had come. A week earlier, the university wanted him to give a talk about ethical technology and how stories can change systems. As the plane lifted off, Sundar looked at his brother beside him, typing notes on his laptop, frowning in focused dot, and he thought, maybe the world didn't need more CEOs dot, maybe. It needed more men like Karthik, who had fallen, gotten back up, and dared to speak dot. What Sundar did quietly inspired millions. But what his brother did next taught them how to rebuild. Asterisk.